Hi everyone, we'll make a start. Thanks for being there. And welcome to today's CECAN webinar. I'm Emma Pritchard. I'm one of the co-investigators on CECAN. For those who haven't joined us before, CECAN stands for the Centre for the Evaluation of Complexity Across the Nexus, which has been running for a few years and has been transforming practice of policy evaluation across food, energy, environment, and water, and other domains to make it fit for a complex world. Today's webinar is on capturing social dynamics for evaluation, trajectory-based qualitative comparative analysis. And I'm delighted to have Lasse, Gerrits and Sofia Pagliarin presenting today's webinar. Lasse is a professor in urban planning at the International Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. He studied public administration and urban planning previously and has a double set of PhDs, one in 2008 and a second in 2018. He's involved in various projects funded by various organizations, including the National Organization for Scientific Research, the German Science Foundation, and other commissioned third-party projects. And he's also a regular advisor for the municipal planning authorities and other government agencies. And Sofia has been working as an associate researcher at the Department for Political Sciences at the University of Bamberg, and she's also received a double doctorate in urban studies in 2014. And she's worked as a postdoc researcher at the Swiss Federal Institute and in the Land System Science Research Group. Sofia is passionate about cities and how they change, and she defines herself as a qualitative researcher, and really particularly enjoys interviews where there's a dance between the interviewee and the interviewer. And she's obviously interested also in what the set theoretic comparative methods that we're going to learn a bit more about today. So Lasse, the way it's going to go is Lasse and Sofia will speak for around 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. Please submit your questions during the talk, that's fine, or any comments or queries. If you could post them on the Q&A part of Zoom, we'll find them and we'll pick them up afterwards. And that's it from me. I'm going to pass it over to Sofia. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, and good day to everyone. Welcome from the side of Lasse and I to all the participants that are following the presentation online and that will also follow our talk, the recorded version of our talk. We also would like to again thank the CECAN for the invitation and also Emma for the nice introduction. Our talk today is titled Capturing Social Dynamics for Evaluation, Trajectory-based Qualitative Comparative Analysis, and we are going to talk about case development processes and how they are relevant for evaluation. And we are also going to present, introduce actually both conceptually and methodologically our approach called Trajectory-based Qualitative Comparative Analysis, or TJ-QCA. The outline of the presentation is as follows. First, Lasse will give the conceptual background of our approach. He will talk about case development processes and also more into details about social and causal complexity. In the second part of the presentation, I will then talk more into details about QCA, time and process, and show some of the basic methodological workings of TJ-QCA. And in the final part of the presentation, Lasse will highlight the main take-home messages and also identify a couple of threads for discussion before we give the room to question and answers. the presentation, our contribution today stems from, or is better explained and examined in our two publications that are shown on the slides. And so if we manage to raise your interest today, please feel free to have a closer look to them. I will then give the word to Lasse for the first part of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sofia, and thanks all for joining us and for having us over here. And just to follow up on what Sofia just said, should you want to look at the papers but you cannot find them, you don't have access to it, then just drop us a message, because sharing is caring and we care about reading and not about selling papers. So with that out of the way, we would like to start this presentation with a very simple, I think almost intuitive observation that I suppose almost everyone in the audience today is familiar with. And that is that any outcome observed at any time, at any point in time, is a result of a process of things that happened before it. And if we want to understand how a certain outcome came about, we need to understand what happened before it. Otherwise, we cannot explain that particular outcome. We can observe but not explain. As an example from the practice of Sofia's and my research, urban renewal projects, so we can evaluate them. The way they are done is basically, there's no standard way of doing urban renewal. Certain projects may first engage with stakeholders, setting up a dialogue, and then let the design follow from the dialogue, or the other way around. It could also be that it starts with an opening bid in the terms of a design to which people could respond. We observe that some projects can change scope over time. They may start with very ambitious plans and then slowly water down to very simple, limited projects. But it can also go the other way around. People could start with a very simple idea and then expand on it. So in other words, if we look at any case that we want to evaluate, we're looking at something that has played out over time. And so we need to have a method that can deal with that. Now, what does this playing out over time mean for the way we do evaluations? Well, it means that in evaluations, we need to deal with this, what we then call social complexity, which is characterized by heterogeneity of the cases that we're looking at. It's characterized by a variation in time and place-bounded contexts. So in doing evaluation, we struggle to capture that. For example, we could go into in-depth case description, and that would be really useful because it could tell us how something has come about as a series of events, series of things that come into being. But if we only look at one particular case, we are really hard pressed to tell which one of these factors reoccur over time across cases. Basically, a single case study makes look everything unique, and you as an evaluator can tell on the basis of your knowledge which ones you have seen elsewhere, but that is not yet evidence. Now, a case comparison, so aligning several cases, could reveal which conditions are unique, which conditions are recurring, which conditions are necessary, sufficient, or combinations thereof. But these comparisons are usually insensitive to processes. So they are, let's say, time agnostic, if you will. And you know, that is actually something that is entirely understandable, because dealing with comparisons over time requires a huge amount of data, and it really poses some methodological challenges. We think that QCA has one solution here. There are other solutions too, but for us, QCA is one venue, if you will, where we can look for solutions, especially if we can tailor QCA such that it can trace processes. And that's basically where we come from originally. We love QCA, we love comparisons, we wanted to make it more time sensitive. So that's where we come from. Now, QCA itself has already been covered by CECAN, so we'll just say a few things about it, not go into too much depth here. But I think the most important bit, I suppose, is that not only is it becoming popular in many places, in scientific places, we can also see an uptake in evaluation studies. And again, that's not even that new. I think people will remember the work of Barbara Befani, who has been doing a lot of work in this regard, or Frits Sager from the University of Bern. And there are other people too. I mean, Sofia and I are working on this. Why does QCA resonate strongly with evaluation studies? Well, because in evaluations, we're often faced with both social and causal complexity. And so if we want to move beyond just giving mere descriptions or simplistic causal statements, then we simply need a method that helps us in dealing with that social and causal complexity. And that takes me to the next point, namely the characteristics of QCA. Now, in short, and it's really super mega short, but I still want to go through it for just highlighting a few things that we find really important. QCA is first and foremost a case-based, diversity-oriented approach. It is geared towards representing heterogeneity in terms of cases through set membership scores. So the role of calibration is extremely important here. Secondly, as a method, it acknowledges that cases emerge under conditions that are local in place and temporal in time, which we then call configurations, which again is an acknowledgement of heterogeneity. So it's neither saying every case is unique, because that's probably not the case. It's also not saying that all cases are governed by the same set of variables, because it isn't. So it really walks a very interesting middle road there by highlighting the different configurations. And it does so by highlighting what is then called causal recipes. Causal recipes are causal statements that tell us what that help us to understand how a certain case has come about and how it compares to other cases, which is very different from saying all cases are controlled by this variable, or if you do X, then all these cases would have been solved. It's much more nuanced, I would say. And it does so because it runs on a set theory, and set theory allows us to see the conditions as members as part of the cases, which is very different from the additive variable-oriented models, where variables are proxies for certain events or certain things, and that take on different quantitative values depending on that certain thing. In QCA, conditions are part of the cases, and they can be either present or absent or degrees thereof, but they are there as inherent, as a characteristic inherent to the case. Now, these 4 points here, they basically summarize what we consider social complexity as we encounter it as researchers or as evaluators once we go out in the field. And QCA has internalized that causal complexity in a number of that social complexity in a number of core concepts that for us highlight the causal complexity we're looking at. And that includes, not limited to, but includes multiple and conjunctural causation, equifinality, and multifinality, of which I would like to highlight equifinality and multifinality because they are so important for the way we understand how things play out over time. So equifinality tells us that different sets of conditions, different configurations can lead to very similar outcomes. Multifinality tells us that very similar configurations can lead to very different outcomes. And again, that is really important for us. If we want to inform policymaking, for example, we can show that one size fits all kind of policy would perhaps not deliver the result that's expected from it. But it can also show you that the degrees to which tailor-made policies have to be rolled. Perhaps it's not necessary to have a policy tailored for every specific case. So in other words, the way QCA can highlight that, I think, really goes to the heart of what we want to achieve with policy evaluation. Of course, this overview of QCA is extremely simplistic. As I said, Sofia and I will be really happy to teach more about QCA, but I know many people in the audience have already heard this, and it's already covered by CECAN. And very importantly, QCA in its current form is not it has many strengths, but it also has a few weaknesses. So it has the shortcomings are mainly that QCA has real difficulties in dealing with time-based dynamics. And And that is where we come in. So today we want to, as I said before, we want to capture as much of the causal and social complexity of processes. And today we want to present a version of QCA, a variation of QCA, if you will, that helps you to uncover causal and social complexity over time, but still in comparison. And which we both Sofia and I believe would be a great addition to the evaluation toolkit. Now that takes us basically to the second and probably even more important bit of this presentation today. So we've talked a bit about the background, we've highlighted what social and causal complexity is, and what we'll do now is show you how those concepts resonate in this renewed version. Sofia will probably have a better term for it, but this variation of QCA, which we then call trajectory-based QCA or TJ-QCA, so we can save a few more minutes in our speaking time. Sofia will now talk about the operational details of TJ-QCA.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lasse. Indeed, I will start from here by talking a bit about this missing link in QCA, because it has, as some of you might know already, QCA is has been originally developed as a method that is time insensitive. So where neither the temporal order of conditions are considered nor the time variation in cases. And we called it, the normal QCA is generally called the conventional QCA, or as we are going to see, pooled QCA. However, of course, this was considered a problem or an issue for empirical research, and there are a number of contributions that have been developed, and here in this table we summarize the main ones. So first, there has been the time QCA, the time QCA, where the temporal order of conditions has been integrated into the workings of QCA by creating a new condition. So for instance, if condition A happens before B and it has a causal link, or it can be assumed, so then a new condition, for instance, condition B or E, is created and integrated into the data set for then the performance of QCA. We also would like to mention the two-step QCA, where basically two different QCAs are performed. One with remote conditions, or remote in time or space, to then perform QCA again with more proximate conditions, either in time mostly, but also in space. However, these approaches consider only at the cross-case level, so the conditions. And then another group of researchers developed a variation of QCA that would be more sensitive to the time variation in cases. Both time series QCA and panel data or longitudinal QCA are rooted in a time series cross-sectional perspective. So they take into consideration the time points of cases, and then try to work with that and adapt them to the functioning of QCA. So for instance, time series QCA, which was developed by Hino, as we will see in a couple of slides, because I will talk about it a little bit more, basically considers the time values per cases, and then calculate a subtraction to obtain one value in order to facilitate calibration as either absence or presence of a condition. And then we have a panel data QCA that is currently the most advanced approach to integrate time variation in cases in QCA, where not only the consistency of pooled QCA, so all the cases for all the time points is calculated, but also consistency and the coverage values of intragroup and intergroup in the data. So, for instance, all the consistency and the coverage is calculated by for all the cases at one time point, and then for all the cases for all the time points. However, I mean, we acknowledge the contributions made so far, but we think that I mean, we consider them anyway related or linked to this time series cross-sectional perspective that sits uncomfortably with the logic, case-based logic of QCA, and also and also social and complex and causal complexity, as Lasse has shown. So the fact that we have a case development, there is a process. So we start from that knowledge, or the knowledge that researchers have about their cases, in order to account for time and development stages within QCA, and that's where our trajectory-based QCA comes in. To illustrate the basic workings, here we have an example. It is also from our own research, and these 3 cases are part of a larger data set of around 40 large-scale urban development projects. I will just talk about the first one, which is the Barcelona airport expansion, in reconstructing the development of the expansion of the airport. Since the 80s, the interviewees highlighted that there were at least 2 development stages related to the case. So one related to the first expansion of the project in the 80s, because of the Olympic Games, and a second big expansion happening in the after the 2000s, because of the role of Barcelona as a popular tourist and business destination. So from here, as you can see, we start from the case-based knowledge, we start from the fieldwork, and then we identify, for instance, in this case, through interviews as researchers, the 2 development stages that can together form the trajectory of the case. In this example, we have only 2 development stages that are connected to specific configurations, as you can see in the table, because we also have the calibrated data set. But with trajectory-based QCA, you can have as many development stages, so to say, or as many configurations as needed within the same case, in order to describe the overall trajectory or development of the case itself as they are needed, and then to then be integrated into QCA. This is again the example that you can find in one of our publications, where we elaborated the analysis by Hino, whose original calibrated data set you can see on the left side of the slide. Here we have 15 countries, each of which has 2 time points, so for 3 of the 4 conditions, but because of this subtraction, only 1 value is obtained for the 1980s and the 1990s. That's what the 80 and the 90 mean, in order to allow calibration. However, in our point of view, from the information on 2 time points, we level out time variation in cases and obtain only one configuration at the end. What we did in trajectory-based QCA is to basically retain 1 configuration only for 7 cases, so only when there was no time variation, so that when the cases for both time points showed the same configuration and outcome, and we differentiated for the rest of the cases the configuration and the outcome because they showed some variation. So they were differently clarified. So the same case were differently calibrated for both time points. As I said, this as we use a Hino's data set with only 2 time points, this does not mean that trajectory-based QCA is limited to that, but as I said before, there are multiple configurations, so multiple development stages that can be used to describe the trajectory of the case. I will now give the word back to Lasse for the last part of our presentation, which is the wrap up, and then we open the room for discussion.
Yes, and thank you so much. Yeah, and I just want to mention that we are aware that we're really rushing through all the materials. Obviously, if people have questions, then they can pose them. We'll be more than happy to answer them in this session or outside of it. Yeah, so don't worry. Normally it takes quite a while to explain all the details, but Emma and Gil were really strict and said you've got 20 to 25 minutes. So there we go. Anyhow. With that out of the way, let's have a very quick overview of then what you can do with TJ-QCA. The obvious advantage is that we can integrate case development as it happens through various stages within QCA. So we are able to capture both within case variation, right, the qualitative changes over time within a case, as well as the between case variation, how various cases differ or are similar between them indeed. It does require from you as a researcher that you define the various development stages of the case. And it's defined as the point in time where a case has a qualitatively different nature or characteristic than before. And that tells you where the cutoff point is between one stage and another stage. So it's not clock time or calendar time or whatever. It is really the point where you think that a case has changed qualitatively. And once you do that, you can integrate that back into the normal operations of QCA, which we have basically explained in the second paper, where you can see all the technical details. But I also need to mention that that making that distinction between various stages is both a strength and it's also a weakness, because we cannot give you an automated procedure for that. Ultimately, that is your interpretation of a case, whether it has changed to such an extent that you consider a new stage, that a new stage has started in a certain case. So we've noticed that when we discuss TJ-QCA with others, that people probably sort of intuitively would like to see an automated procedure, sort of press the button and then the case will be divided in various stages. But we can't, simply because of the nature of cases. We cannot do that as an automated procedure, but it's up to you as a researcher to do it on the basis of qualitative data. And the other big disadvantage, I would say, is that any case keeps developing over time. And so what you consider final is very likely not to be final, as there is no, well, there's final definitely at some point. Earth will heat up and all that, but that's we're not there yet. So all the cases that you're looking at are processes, and that goes for spatial projects as well as for social projects. It doesn't matter. It is the outcome is rarely final as such, and so putting an endpoint in your research can often feel a bit artificial. It can feel a bit uncomfortable. Again, coming full circle to where we started, we think that this is actually sort of inherent to the social reality rather than to the method itself. I think actually, or we both think that any method struggles with time and final stages and all that. So in many ways, it is just simply what it is. But still, we wanted to highlight that. It's while we love TJ-QCA, it's of course not the alpha and omega of all social processes. So with that out of the way, we'd like to thank you for your attention, and we were happy to chat with you in the Q&A.
Thank you both. That was great. Some really interesting ideas and concepts and issues there. We've got some questions already, if you can see on the Q&A. The first one by Gemma Gardner. If you could give an example maybe of the approach during an evaluation which looked at impact on outcomes for individuals. Can you maybe give an example to how this has been used?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and an example of TJ-QCA on the individual level is not present since we just released the method itself only a month ago. So Sofia and I are trying it out now in a database that consists of spatial projects within the German-speaking world, so Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. But ultimately, my personal view, and Sofia should correct me if I'm wrong, but my personal view is that the trick is in casing, and casing is often overlooked. Projects are taken as cases and taken for granted, but casing is really important. The reason I'm mentioning that is that whether your case is an individual or a project or a policy program does not matter in the sense that it's a case that moves over time, and it can be an individual or a spatial project. That doesn't matter. Obviously, there are differences between spatial projects and individuals, but if you get the casing right, then you can treat your individuals as cases within QCA, no problem whatsoever. No, Sofia, you want to add something to that?
No, I completely agree, and indeed, I mean, it depends on how, in this case, the individual lifespan or some period of time in the life of certain individuals is transformed into a case. So for instance, childhood or teenagerhood or adulthood, for instance, where this start is also a matter of convention, but also a matter of specific turning points in the life of everyone, of the individual. So it depends also which kind of individuals we are talking about. But yeah, it's definitely a question of casing. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Gemma. We've got a second question by Mark. Please keep questions coming in the Q&A part. Yes. Mark Hadman asks a question and says, sorry if he's naive, but I think it's a great question, so not a naive question at all. Do all of the cases when you use this method need to be at the same stages of development to defined as a trajectory?
Yeah, this is a very nice question, actually, because indeed sometimes it's a little bit tricky to understand. But so first of all, there has to be some data homogeneity, of course. So the cases have to be comparable. For instance, in our own research, we have to decide if, for instance, an urban renewal project is advanced enough to be included in the data set or not, because if it's only on paper, maybe there is not so much things that can be used for evaluation, for instance. So that's first of all. But then when development stages are defined, multiple development stages are defined by cases, it's really a case-based matter. So it does not matter if one case starts, for instance, in the 70s or 73 or 75 or even in the 2005. Because it's the development stage and how the case is treated as a trajectory in QCA depends on how well the development stages that are identified by the researcher can represent this case over time. Do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing to highlight there also is that if a case has stayed the same or seemingly similar for a very long period of time, then that is fine too. That is also an empirical outcome. So just to make clear that you should not only look at cases that change, but stasis, the lack of change is also extremely important to understand. So just in addition to what Sofia just said. I'm
personally really pleased to hear about that, because I think the continuity of cases is super interesting as well.
Absolutely, and we're always geared towards looking at change, right? Change is easier to identify than stasis, but it's extremely important also to be aware of continuity, definitely.
Jean Davis, or Jean Davis, I don't know, but Jean Davis asked about the kind of how you make these decisions around development stages. For example, you made that point, Sofia, but I think the point here is about the recommended granularity that might be used to create a fuzzy set, or do you just go with the variation of contextual conditions? Can you say a little bit more about how you make those decisions?
Oh, Lasse, yeah.
I've done something really bad, and that's reading the other questions. I was also thinking about this one. Man, there's really so many good questions coming in.
Yeah, they're great.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's really great. So let's get back to the question of Jean Davis. Is there any recommendation on the deciding on those development stages? Well, yeah, you can do it in so many ways, I believe. So I'm just speaking from my personal research experience. When I look at policy processes, because the evaluation of policies is what I do a lot, then I often use the rounds model as a sort of a heuristic to guide myself to points where a certain process has been ended or has morphed into a second stage or a third stage or whatever. And that theory itself is really helpful. It's a heuristic, does not predict everything, but it's a nice heuristic to do it. When it comes to the spatial projects, we look at qualitative changes. So for example, an old industrial estate may have been converted into, let's call it a hipster urban area, then those would be two different stages of the same spatial place. But these are rules of thumb, and we do not have an automated procedure for it, as much as we would love to have it.
Yeah, and I would like to ask that here, I mean, the standard conventions of empirical research in the social sciences are valid. So the fact that, of course, you have to, if you do qualitative field work, you have to select a specific technique. It has to be backed up by documents, maybe field visits. In the case of urban research, it's done so. That the type of interviewing style has to be defined. So it's I completely agree with Lasse that no automated procedure can be used to identify development stages, but as long as they are then backed up with empirical data according to the conventional standards of qualitative research in this case, or anyway social sciences research.
And just as one addition to what you just said, Sofia, the last part of the question is, it seems to be a variation of contextual conditions. No, it's a variation of the outcome condition. So that's what we're looking at, and that variation in the outcome condition could be produced by very similar configurations. Just to make that clear, it's not just a change in the contextual conditions. Good question, though.
So yeah, we do have quite a lot of questions. They're really good questions. I'm not sure we'll have time to go through them all. So
we'll talk quicker.
Maybe I can ask you both to kind of shorten, or either stick to one person answering. Stefan Wolfer asks about the issue of how it got there, how you do that. Do you look at sub-processes, or how do you do that part? Just to, sorry, jumped a bit. Do you look at the two sets of conditions associated with the outcomes, or do both sub-processes lead to the same outcome?
Okay, I'm trying to guess where that question comes from. Perhaps it comes from the subsequencing, for example.
Yeah, I think the way I understood it was to do with how you measure, how you slice up the trajectory. Do you look at events, sub-processes? How do you come up with?
Exactly. So it ties in with some of the other questions that we've had. You as a researcher then decide when in a process you believe qualitative change has happened. And Sofia and I are really very much aware that those changes can be also the result of other sub-processes that run underneath it or in the background. Sure, what the right phrasing would be there. Which is not something we can capture in the current version. So we can look at sequences within one case, but we cannot look at subsequences within sequences in one case. That's a level of granularity that we haven't achieved yet. I'm not sure also if we can get there. would be great. Yeah.
And then maybe I can also add that it's also discipline specific. Maybe there are some theories that can also point out to some sub-processes, or for instance, in urban research, we know that there is the planning stage, the implementation stage, or the public consultation stage. So also from theory and practice, it is possible to identify sub-processes that of course, they can also be convention, and although they different factors can affect them, but maybe they are also accepted by the academic community. So I'm not sure if yeah, could also be a way to identify them.
Simone Ginsberg asks about what do the results actually look like for TJ-QCA? Is it something like factor B at time 1 and factor C at time 4? What's the prime implicant? Can you actually say a little bit more about it, just to, and she makes a good point about how to avoid retroactive causation in terms of, I think that means in terms of how do we look back, how do you actually, what can you say more about what it looks like to avoid causal errors?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sofia.
You can, I mean, well, it's a great question because we are actually working on it. Basically, as I said, we have presented this the trajectory-based QCA, but by using Hino's dataset that was already there, and we showed. And I mean, our idea was to, with both publications, to communicate the conceptual and methodological foundations of the method that has, however, to be tested and also changed through empirical research. What we wanted to show is that one case can be described by different trajectories. So in the property space of the conditions, it can really draw this trajectory, so this line of development. In one of our publications, I mean, about trajectory-based QCA, we show that some cases have a reverse configuration, but still produce the outcome. However, it's we are still discovering it ourselves, also with this other research that we are currently working on, and we assume that also contradictions might be quite an issue in when we are going to analyze this the truth table in a dynamic way. So yeah, more to come on that, and then I give the word to Lasse.
Yeah, I think one example of what it looks like is the research that one of our team members, Mi-Suk Choi, will present tonight in another session, which looks at the emergence of state capitalism in post-communist states in Europe. And she could show, using TJ-QCA, how various states have moved through this property space, and some of them have gone completely towards state capitalism. Some states have obtained a more hybrid form. And so what we could do in the data set is we could identify which configurations are associated with the change, the bifurcation, not the change, the bifurcation between hybrid forms and full state capitalism. Just to give a quick example of what it could look like. And it also reminds me of another question that I saw scrolling through, which is, can you visualize the outcomes? Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes, definitely. And this is actually this is where it started for us many years ago, because we were drawing property spaces and attractors, and we were trying to figure out how we can map cases such that you can see that movement over time, and in such a way that it's also plausible in terms of causal statements. So that's what we definitely like to highlight also, is that ultimately you can draw that property space, and you can show how cases have moved, and some of them all move in the same direction, but there's also cases that move in different different directions, which is exactly the bifurcation effect that we're after.
Yeah, great, thank you. And yes, I echo this comment saying how great the rich answers are. So thanks both for really answering these great questions. A couple of questions about
questions.
Yeah, they are great questions. A couple of questions about QCA. Always want to encourage people who are new to QCA as well. From Canix Bukavesa, or it looks like after calibration, you're ranking the individuals. That's one question. And the other one is about, again, can you say more about potentially participatory QCA and whether that's been used, and actually whether you could use participatory type approaches to define in the stages, for example? So there's two questions in one there.
Well, let's pick up with the last one, because we need less time to think about it. Can you do it in participatory? Yeah, definitely. I think there are also applications of normal standard QCA that does it in that works with participatory processes. Calibration is really a great moment in time where you can sit down and ask people in the room, would you agree with this or that kind of calibration? There are obviously pitfalls there too, especially when evaluations are a little political. Then this is also a great opportunity to have the results such that they confirm the policy or something like that. So yes, but that is something that I believe is universal in any evaluation method, but it definitely is a very good way of also engaging with stakeholders. I totally agree. As for the first question, Emma, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I think it was to do with ranking individuals. I've got a niche with it, but I want you to see if it is to do with after so the question is, after calibration seems to me like ranking the individuals in the sample. Is that right or wrong? I think it's the issue of ranking.
Okay, let me see. My first question is,
there is no, sorry if I step in, Lasse, but I think there is no ranking, or I'm not sure what exactly by ranking is meant. It's not a ranking, it's that, for instance, we have a case that is developing in 20 years, and we just divide this development into different development stages, but they are not ranked. And not in terms of that the development stage is oriented at a certain goal. Of course, there is the outcome, but the outcome does not rank the specific stages. Of course, it's also discipline specific, as we said before, and related to the theories that you are going to use, but the outcome is not final. And so there is no ranking, although maybe could also be used for checking the stages, the development stages of the cases. I'm not sure, Lasse, if you want to add.
It's something we need to think about. But ranking as such is not really part of QCA. And I do think that the question also relates to what Rick Davis is asking in the chat. So how many time periods could you cover per case? 2 or many more? Well, 2 at the minimum. Otherwise, there's nothing that you can say. But many more. Absolutely, yeah. There's probably an upper limit, but that is a computational limit rather than something that you cannot process. But yeah, perhaps your tool can actually help there.
And Stefan Wolfer has a follow-up question related to how could I possibly connect the 2 sub-processes and relate them to the outcome? Or in other words, can I come to an evolutionary perspective with your variation of QCA, which is very interesting. I don't think it's a stupid question, by the way. I think it's a great question. How do you actually connect these processes? I suppose there's always the danger of connecting them when they're not connected. But maybe you could say something about how you've done that.
So, yeah, I mean that's the holy grail as far as I'm concerned. And I'll be the first to admit that we haven't reached that yet. So for me, sort of as a point on the horizon, if you don't mind me using that management blabber, what I really would like to achieve is to reconcile sequencing and subsequencing, as in the work of Heise or the work of Abbott, with comparative methods. And it's actually something we're working on, but it really is a whole new level of complexity. So we're not there yet, but we're trying to reach it, definitely. It's a very good point. I really wish we had the method ready, but no, not yet.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned sequence, because it did occur to me as you were speaking that trajectory requires obviously time points, but then, and you mentioned right at the beginning about kind of the orderedness of processes mattering or potentially mattering to an outcome, or maybe not mattering to an outcome.
But the way we see it now, is, you know, the way that the method deals with this is basically it sees the case with one tail, if you will, till into the past. But we're very much aware that there are lots of subsequences that play a role in there too. And I mean, I can think of various ways of dealing with it, which, for example, one could be is to divide cases into subcases, which would be a practical way of going on about. But there must be a more elegant way of doing it, I think. Or
I suppose it's also when a sub-process might get folded into the next process and almost like being ironed out in the dynamic, or not.
Yeah, I see a comment here by Rick who says, you know, you could also simulate that. Yeah, that's absolutely true too. Yeah. Yeah,
great. Question, Stacey Sherman, and I apologize to Shaylin Popak. Shaylin asks about which heuristic did you mention about identifying development stages? I can't remember now, but I don't know if you can quickly.
Yeah, sure. It's context specific, so it really depends on what you're looking at. If she can put it in the chat, then we can give a more sensible answer. It really depends on the topic.
Right. And Stacey Sherman's question is, where do you think the most value is? Is it in comparing this in comparing the two subsets and their outcomes all across different cases? So are there different issues to consider? So in a question about comparison and where you want the focus to be, or the value of the comparison to be.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we are working on it because indeed with this method we changed the way, as one person said, I'm citing him now, we changed the way the truth table is seen. So if cases, if the truth table in QCA includes development stages, then we have also to look at the truth table in dynamically. What this means exactly also, if one case is a negative case in one stage and then a positive case in another one, or in another stage, or the other way around, we will have to check that. But I would say that because of the logic of QCA, because we are still working, we are still talking about QCA, case-based knowledge is important in order to interpret that, and also for the fact that we have to take care of both. So both the sub-processes for each case, so the case-specific development stages or the histories of cases, as David Byrne would say, and also at the cross-case level. So in QCA, we have to look at them, at both of them. Not sure, Lasse, if you want to say something, or if I understand
that's
the question right.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, basically. Yeah.
So Shaylin's point about the rhetoric, or not rhetoric, the kind of rules of thumb of how you do comparison. The context was elementary schools in England, which is still a little bit, I'm unclear what the question is exactly, Shaylin, if you could repose it.
Yeah, she's looking for a rules of thumb with which you can discern different development stages. And really the biggest, the simplest and most difficult rule of thumb is the qualitative change. And qualitative change can be expressed in so many ways. I know next to nothing about school policy, so I'm really very hesitant to say anything about it. But as long as you're observing a qualitative change compared to what was there before, then you can say you have entered a new stage. Bearing in mind, of course, that it's never clear cut. You know, nothing changes overnight. Well, a couple of things do. Most things don't change overnight. So making that decision is not an arbitrary decision, but it's definitely also a soft decision, something that you have to consider carefully, perhaps also in a participatory way, to see if your assessment of that qualitative change has any ground.
And yes, if I may add something to Lasse's reply, this is exactly what we tried to summarize in our last slides, that it is both the advantage of this approach and the disadvantage, because if we start from the case-based knowledge that the researcher has, then of course it is an advantage because we know a lot about the cases, for instance, the elementary schools in England, but at the same time we have to find ourselves some analytical frameworks and then calibration rules to treat that, that information. And actually there has been quite some contributions trying to fill the gap between QCA and qualitative research. So when non-quantitative information is used and then quantitized into a set membership scores, which I think it's a big it is becoming a bigger field of, focus of analysis for QCA researchers. But that's absolutely key, and it's one of the the beauties and also the disadvantages or the challenges of the method.
Just to add to that, I think for many people it's convenient to rely on quantitative data, because that, in calibration or something, you can do a little sum there and then you're done, or at least that's what it looks like. I appreciate that, though we're often also dealing with qualitative data. And I've just gone through a QCA together with one of our colleagues at the TU Dortmund in Germany, and we had raw qualitative data, which we then coded and blind coded. So she coded first, and then I followed her code book, not knowing how she had coded. And funnily enough, the calibration came out of that was pretty similar. There were exceptions there, but that, they could be solved in dialogue. We often actually agreed. So even though qualitative data may look rough and hard to put in set membership scores, it can be done. It's definitely not impossible, and it works. Ton of work though, but it works.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm just really excited about this because I feel like this is sort of the future, isn't it, of, well, possibly complex methods, complexity-oriented methods, and thinking about trajectories and patterns possibly within those trajectories. And I'm always struck by how much we assume change is possible. We want it to, it gives us hope, right? But we may find that sometimes it's not the time, or something's making it more stuck than we might want it to be. Are there any more questions? We've had some really good ones. We've been firing some heavy ones.
Oh, very good questions indeed. Really enjoy this.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody for the attention and also the nice questions, because we hope we raise attention or interest in this method, in this approach actually.
Yeah.
And if people feel that they want to digest this a bit and have questions later on, really feel free to drop us a message. We appreciate that, and we'll take our time to answer it, help out in various ways. We now see a couple of people starting to use it, which is really absolutely great. And having the dialogue with people who use it also helps us to understand better where the limitations are and where we could refine the method in one way or the other. So keep the dialogue going.
Yeah. Just to sum up, Fernando Rosario's point, congratulations. This is a good variation in innovation. And one last question by Rick Davis, if we've got time. What does a QCA solution look like here? Condition A at time 1, condition B at time 2 equals outcome X. If you've got a minute to answer that, just because we've got.
Yeah, it's very unlikely that one condition will control for every development stage, but you would definitely see which configurations of conditions govern for various stages. Yeah, but not one. So it's not condition A at T1 and condition B, but it would be, I don't know, A times B, whatever, in the Boolean algebra, basically, for various stages.
Great, it's a nice, concise answer. Something like what you suggest, Rick, but more complex. All right, unless you've got any other comments, Lasse and Sofia, do you have any last words?
As said, thanks a lot for inviting us. Thanks a lot for listening and posing really great questions, and looking forward for continuous dialogue.
Yeah, thank you both very much. Thanks to everyone who was on, and the questions were awesome. Thank you, Gail, also for organising us and getting everything out there as well. So it will be posted online and the video will be uploaded in due course. But for today, thank you very much, Lasse. Thank you very much, Sofia.
Thank you to all.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.